What do most Fortune 500 executives have in common? They learned important lessons on the fields and courts of their high school and collegiate sports teams. This is true for both men and women. Ernst & Young found that a whopping 94% of women holding a C-suite position played sports. Their wins and losses shaped their habits and who they would become. Join me on my journey to sit with some of the brightest executives in the world as we discuss how sports shaped their professional trajectory in life. I'm your host, Don Yeager, and this is Corporate Competitor Podcast. With me for today's episode is one of my favorite people on the planet, John C. Maxwell. John is a #1 New York Times bestselling author, coach, and speaker who has sold more than 26 million books that are now out there in 50 different languages. He's been identified as the most influential leadership expert in the world by Business Insider and Inc. magazine. As the founder of the John Maxwell Companies, the John Maxwell Team, Equip, and the John Maxwell Leadership Foundation, he has trained more than 6 million leaders. In 2015, he reached the milestone of having trained leaders from every country in the world. He's had me as a guest on his podcast, the John Maxwell Leadership Podcast, which has more than 100 episodes. And now I am so excited to reverse roles and dive into his experience as a corporate competitor.
I was very competitive in my younger years. And all of a sudden, I began to see a bigger picture of what would happen if I would spend my life, instead of trying to beat someone, help someone get better. And I took all those competitive juices. I used to say I went from ladder climber. In my book, Leadership, I talk about this. I went from ladder climber to ladder holder to ladder builder.
John, thanks for joining us.
My joy. I'm so excited about being with you. You're such a beautiful friend. And whenever I get time with Don Yeager, I'm a happy guy.
Well, ditto. I love being with you too. I learn so much every time we're together. You know, John, we've talked a little bit about what we're accomplishing here, or attempting to in this podcast. But I know that growing up in Ohio, just near Columbus, that you loved basketball and you were a player. So I'd love for you to tell me a little bit about basketball, high school, Circleville, Ohio.
Well, I was in the 4th grade and I went to watch a high school basketball game, Circleville High School Tigers. And I can remember I was in the balcony and I was leaning against the fence, the little railing there. And they turned all the lights off and the warm-ups were over and they put a spotlight on the huddle and they announced the starting lineup for the Circleville Tigers. I'm in the 4th grade. I kid you not. I'm watching these players run out in that spotlight to center court, the people cheering for them. And right then, I said, I want to play basketball. And I went home and I said, Dad, I want to play basketball. I just saw them introduce basketball players. I want to be a basketball player. My dad he was such a wonderful father. So he literally cemented our drive, and against the garage, he put up a backboard. And at that time, he was overseeing, he was a superintendent of probably a couple hundred churches. And so he's building my basketball court for me, and he didn't get the rim up, and he has to go out kind of an emergency for a day and a half. And he said, I'll be back and I'll put up the rim. I said, that's okay. I got my Spalding basketball. I got my concrete drive. I got my backboard. I could still see him pulling out of that driveway. I'm waving to him. I'm just dribbling for maybe 2 or 3 minutes. And then I took the basketball and I threw it up against the backboard. Of course, there's no rim. And it hits the backboard. It just rolls off the side into the grass. And I never picked it up until Dad came back. And that was the day I realized it's really not fun shooting a ball unless you have a target. It was one of the first leadership lessons I ever had in my life. If you don't have a goal, you lose all of your incentives. People when they go bowling, they say, well, I just do it for the fellowship. I said, then remove the pins. I mean, just, hey, roll that ball down that alley and watch it clunk against the back of it. And how many times you go pick up that ball and throw it without having some kind of feedback of whether how well you did. But that launched me, the Circleville Tigers and the introductions. And then I got my basketball court. I was on my way. In 5th grade, 6th grade, I was in community basketball. And in the 6th grade, our team from Franklin School got into the championship. And it was at Circleville High School. It was at the place where I'd seen the big boys play with the lights out and the spotlight on. I kid you not. I was so excited to be on that basketball court. I went straight over to the sideline, the bench where the Circleville Tigers sat in their huddle. And I sat there, Don. I'm in the 5th grade. And I closed my eyes so that I can turn the lights out in the arena. I closed my eyes. And I audibly said, and starting at guard, John Maxwell. And I opened my eyes and I ran out to the center of the court, just like the players, and just imagined all the people clapping. And all the other people on the team, they're like, what are you doing? I said, I'm introducing myself. Someday I'm going to run out on this court and they're going to introduce me as the guard for the Circleville High School Tigers. Literally, that's what launched me into my basketball career right there.
Wow. I love it. What a great lesson, both on the goal, but also the idea that you visualized the opportunity. And that was so important to you.
Oh, huge. Just huge. It was.
What was the greatest influence? Who was the greatest influence as you developed and as your love for sport continued to grow?
Well, I grew up in Circleville, 20 miles south of Columbus, Ohio. So get the picture, 1960, 61, 62. I'm in 60, I'm 13 years old. And Ohio State had great basketball teams back there.
It sure did.
Jerry Lucas, John Havlicek, Larry Siegfried, Mel Noel, Joe Roberts. All 5 of those players went on to the pros. All 5 of them. I think it's the first time that I know of in college basketball where all of them went there. And so I fell in love with the Ohio State Buckeyes. And later I became a wonderful friend of Jerry Lucas's, and John Havlicek spoke at our high school banquet. So it was really kind of a basketball team that was the Ohio State, probably arguably the best years they've ever had in basketball, where when you think of Havlicek and Lucas, both were all pros. And so that was the team that kind of was a catalyst for it. But I had a coach, Don Neff, who really taught leadership very well. And to my surprise, when I was a sophomore, he named me captain of the team.
As a sophomore?
As a sophomore. And I was shocked. I was the youngest player. Everybody was shocked. And I'll never forget. Coach Neff said, let me tell you what I'm doing here. He said, he's the youngest, but there's nobody on the team that wants the rest of you to succeed as much as him. He claps and cheers and smacks your butt every time you're coming down the court. And he said, he's just the cheerleader. So I was a captain at a very young age. And really, you talk about how this applies to your life, just like it's no fun to throw a basketball unless you have a goal. Every 4th quarter, especially my junior and senior year, every 4th quarter, at the timeout when we were breaking for the last quarter, he'd hold me back. The rest of the team would go to the floor. And he'd look at me. He'd say, John, I need you now. I need you now. Take the ball. Help me out. Let's win this game. And I kid you not, the empowerment that I felt as a 16-year-old kid, I need you now. I need you now. And he would say, John, you don't have to shoot the whole game, but I want you to shoot at the first of the game to get us started. And I want you to shoot at the first of the 4th quarter to get us on a roll. His confidence in me was an amazing experience for me to say, okay, I have to perform. And one of the things I love about sports is the fact that you have to perform under pressure, but you have to perform under pressure with people watching.
Right.
That's a whole different game. And when I look today at how I can handle pressure and how I love it to be on the line and how I love the game to be on the line and that whole process in business or in relationships, and I look back and I said, I know where I got that. I got that when the 4th quarter huddle broke and Coach Neff would hold me back, look me right in the eye, and say, I need you now. I got to have you. Perform big for me.
Yeah. The other great lesson in that for me is the idea that you became captain. Yes, you're a good player,
but he loved the way you actively cheered others on. And that's what made you worth following. So you were a great teammate, which is what would make you ultimately a great leader.
And I wasn't the best player. As a sophomore, I wasn't. Junior, senior year, perhaps, but not the sophomore year. There were two or three. I would probably be about maybe number 4 then. But yeah, the attitude, the spirit, he said, you're going to be the captain.
What do you bring? What do you bring to the game every day, right?
Yeah, that's right.
And you can bring that every day.
Yeah, you can bring that every day.
Yep. Your father, you mentioned him. I love reading your love for Dr. Melvin Maxwell. And you mentioned, but he grew up during the Great Depression, and he went on to become president of what's today Ohio Christian. And now we know he built you a basketball goal, but what other ways did he encourage you?
Well, first of all, my father didn't do sports. He grew up very poor in Georgetown, Ohio. That's down by Cincinnati, Ohio. After school, he'd go do errands for people. And there were 3 people that were maybe the more wealthier people in the little town of Georgetown, only 800 people. And he worked for all 3 of those families. And every day after school, he'd go. So he didn't get to play ball at all. But he told me, he said, John, I would look at them and watch them succeed, and I would watch the rest of us not. And I kept asking myself, going through school, doing the errands, what sets them apart? And he said, I came to the conclusion by a junior in high school that what set them apart from the rest of us is they thought differently than we did. And he said, they loved me. I did errands, and I hung around with them. And he said, I adopted their way of thinking. It wasn't the way of thinking that I had at my home. I adopted their way of thinking. And when I wrote the book, Thinking for a Change, when I wrote that book, it was out of that conversation, my father. But he was growing up right after the Depression when a lot of people were poor. And yet my father held when people were in lines for food, my father had 3 part-time jobs. Mm-hmm. This is an incredible story. And again, he learned from them how to think. And he would go to the hardware store, local hardware store, say, I know you can't pay me today, but I love to work. So could I just work for you for free? You just tell me what you want around the store, and I'll do them. And the owner said, well, I can't pay you. I know, it's okay. Just what would you like done? And Dad would work all day for him for free. And at the end of the day, he'd come up and shake his hand and say, thanks for letting me work for you today. I just really enjoyed it. And the store owner would say, well, son, you worked hard. I wish I could do something for you. Oh, he said, you can. He said, if we get through this little difficult financial, if you ever can't afford somebody, need somebody part-time, maybe a day a week or whatever, just remember how hard I work and call on me. And then the next day, he'd go to the grocery store, and we went to all the stores in town and did the same thing. I'll work for free. It's okay. In 1 month, he had 3 part-time jobs.
In the Depression,
everybody else is standing in line.
Yep.
Same town, same situation, just totally thought differently. And so what my father brought to the game to me was not any knowledge of sports at all, but he brought to the game of how to think correctly and how to think good, how to manage myself and the self-discipline that you need as an athlete. In fact, my father, when he came to my first basketball game, he was very excited, didn't know anything. I mean, he probably didn't even know most of the rules of the game, but he was just very excited that I was playing. And he started about halfway up the bleachers. And literally by the time the game was in the 4th quarter, he was right behind the team. He'd worked himself all the way down to there, and he's leaning there, hearing the huddle, and he's talking to me, saying, Johnny, you could do this. And it was hysterical. He was like a little kid, and he probably didn't realize he wasn't supposed to really be in the huddle, but he couldn't help himself. He just wanted to get in there and kind of, one more shot of encouragement. And that's my father. What an amazing person.
Well, I know how much you love him, and I love the stories you tell. You and I have had the chance in working together to sit down and interview several folks who have won a championship or 2. Guys like Urban Meyer and Rick Hendrick and Mike Matheny, then of the St. Louis Cardinals, and David Ross, today manager of the Cubs. What are some of the ways the lessons we learned in those interviews became part of what you taught to other corporate leaders?
Well, when I think of Rick Hendrick, of course, with NASCAR, he's a beautiful man. I love this man. Of course, he has 3 teams, and it's all under Hendrick Motors, but I mean, he's got 3 different teams out there racing competitively on race days. And one day he called me on the phone. He said, John, he said, I've got a tough assignment for you. I said, well, what is it? He said, I want you to come and I'm going to bring all three of my teams together. I want you to spend about an hour and a half with them. And I want you to talk to them about how to cooperate together when they're competing against each other.
Competing against each other. Yeah.
I said, I don't know if I can pull that one off. Honest to God, it's almost like this is not a natural mix because you got these competitive athletes. And what was happening is, they were trying to get the edge over each other because they wanted to win on the track, and yet you're wanting to also share information so all of you get to better. I probably worked harder on that talk than any other, and I came up with 5 or 6 things of how to complete one another while you compete with one another. But Mr. Henrik really understood that even though he had 3 different groups under his name, that their greatest value is supporting and needing each other. He understood that the more he could get them to talk together, the better the teams would play. And he was just a wise man and a very wise leader. Of course, John Wooden better than I did, but I spent some time with him, and I asked him what he missed the most about coaching. I'm sure he told you the same thing, and he said practice. He loved practice. He taught me so much about that. If you really practice well, he said by the time the game was on Saturday, back then it was usually a Saturday game, he said, I just roll up my program and cross my knee and lean back and let him play. He said, honestly, the game was already over before the game began because he said they were ready to play. And it was just a great teaching to me on the whole issue of preparation and, just play well. And, and it shows up. It shows up in the game. Of course, you could tell 100 stories of John Wooden. Both Mike Matheny and Urban Meyer really taught me about utilizing outside people. To make a team great, you got to bring some people from the outside that can give a perspective that the team doesn't have by being on the inside. And what I mean by that is, I would go in, and when the St. Louis Cardinals were down here every spring training, when Mike was here, now even with the present manager, they'd say, John, can you come over and do some teaching for us and help us out? And it's this whole thing of utilizing other people besides just your own to gain a perspective that helps you to obviously be a better team. And then, of course, I was with Jim Tressel when he was at Ohio State also, and I did the Ohio State-Michigan game. Well, a kid growing up in Ohio to do the Ohio State-Michigan game every Friday night. Every Friday night, I'd go up to the hotel and stay with the team, and I would talk to the team on Friday night. And then Saturday, I'd have breakfast with them, do the walk. I'd be on the sidelines, and I'd get in the box with the coach. In fact, his players, his ex-players, all his Heisman, they were on the outside of the box. They're saying, John, you're the only one that can get on the inside. And it was just a great experience. But he, out of his playbook, he had a page that I loved in his playbook called Things That Do Not Require Giftedness and Ability.
Right, yeah.
And he had a whole page of things that are choices that we make. When I saw that, because I had one of those manuals to kind of prepare to talk to the team for the first time. When I saw that, that was the idea that I got for doing the book on talent is never enough. And the fact that there are a whole bunch of things you got to add to that talent to really be the player that you want to be. So I learned so much from him and so many business principles.
And, when you talk about your time with Hendrik earlier, one thing that really stood out to me is that a lot of times, especially corporately, right, we hear executives, we hear leaders talk about their team, right? But the truth is there's a difference between being a team and being a collection of people collecting a paycheck from the same organization, right?
Totally.
And what Rick was trying to get you to talk about was the need to be a team. When you are advising, especially given your athletic experience and your time and your love of sports, how do you help people think about being a team versus a collection of individuals all drawing the same paycheck?
Well, I think, the thing that we're thinking about most now, because it's the most recent, is The Last Dance with Michael Jordan. It's very obvious that Michael was the best player in professional basketball, but in the beginning he wasn't winning championships. And if you saw that shift in The Last Dance where he said, oh, you know what, we need to get us a team. We need to play better together. We need to get better players. And I think that no matter how gifted we are, in my book on the laws of teamwork, I have a law called the law of Mount Everest. And the law of Mount Everest just simply says, as the challenge escalates, the need for teamwork elevates. Anything that's big, you got to have a team. There's no such thing as solo accomplishments in the big stuff. In fact, every year, Don, I have an event called Exchange, where I have about 120 leaders. And every year I take them to a different city and we do leadership experiences in that city. We're going to take them to San Diego this year and do stuff with the SEALs and just, but I give them leadership experiences. And a few years ago, 3 or 4 years ago, I took them to Charlotte and we went to Rick's place and we had so much fun. We divided the 120 into maybe like, I don't know, 14 teams. And they did the change the tires drill.
Here's the tires, right? Yeah.
On the cars. And we had the timekeepers and the whole crew there teaching them, training them how to do that. 2 hours of, you've never seen business people so excited in your life, putting on those tires and trying to win in that competition. And what was huge is we did it, I think 4 maybe runs at it. And every time they got better, they could see their improvement. And it was a blast.
Yeah, and each time they figured out how to get better. I got the chance to be there with you, which was pretty fun. I got to ask, it's been nearly 54 years since you last played for your high school team. For most people, a great competitive nature really never goes away. How do you express your competitive fire today? Do you still shoot a basket or two? I know you love golf. How do you express your competitive fire today?
I have a basketball court still, and I'm still a pretty good shooter. See, I played before the 3-point line. My basketball coach, after they had a 3-point line, went back to the old film and said, "John, if they'd had a 3-point line when you played, you'd average 33 points a game in high school." Because
Wow.
I was a gunner, I was a shooter. I spent all my energy on the offensive side. It was kind of like to the big boys. I'd say, "Would you get the ball? I'm running down the court. Could you just get the ball?
Make sure to hit me on the outlet.
Look down the court, because the one person's not boxing his opponent out. I mean, can you throw me a pass here? I'm ready to score." So I still love to. And I play golf. You know what's something that's very interesting, because when you ask that question, I'm not near as competitive as I was. I'm 73. Maybe it's an age thing, but let me tell you, I had a transition that was pretty big in my life. I was very competitive in my younger years. And all of a sudden, I began to see a bigger picture of what would happen if I would spend my life, instead of trying to beat someone, help someone get better. And I took all those competitive juices. I used to say I went from ladder climber. In my book, Leadership, I talk about this. I went from ladder climber to ladder holder to ladder builder. And I have got into the multiplication game now. I've had a lot of success under my belt, but I can honestly say today, helping other people pass their expectations and succeed is a much greater reward to me than doing it myself. I know what I can do, and I know I can do it very well. But to help somebody else exceed their expectations, and I'll have to say my competitive nature has done 2 things. One is it's been now literally put into the hands of others where I want to make them better. Sometimes I think I want them to do better than they want to do themselves. And then the other part is I'm still very competitive with myself. Mm-hmm. And what I mean by that is just very much I love to improve myself and get better. Yesterday ended last night, and I'm just committed to whatever was best yesterday has to become better today. So don't rest on the best. I pretty much say if best is always for the moment.
Yeah.
But the moment that moment is over, best becomes the foundation for tomorrow. I build on best. How could I have done that better? How could I have written that chapter better? And I'm always tweaking and improving. So I think my competitive nature has gone into self-improvement, and it's gone into pouring into other people and having the great satisfaction of watching people probably do more than they would have done if I wouldn't have come into their life.
I've always wanted to ask you, though, were you a trash talker?
Yeah, I was.
I knew it.
I'm ashamed to say it, but I in fact, back in our day, I mean, I'm talking about 63, 64, 65 in high school, we had a 6'8" boy, and we always got the opening tip. And I got the ball coming down the court. I would tell my guy, I'm about to score on you. I'm going to tell you, I'm not passing the ball. I'm not going to pass the ball. I'm just going to score on you. And I loved it. I loved to get that mental edge over them as quickly as I could. But I was in fact, I was Totally indecent, to be honest with you. I was just, yeah. In fact, I was a better trash talker than I was a player, to be honest with you.
That's true of most of us, my brother.
But I got in their heads. I got in there. Oh my gosh.
Yeah.
And if I scored that opening bucket on it, that poor,
it's over.
It's over now. I am talking to you the rest of the way home. You might as well go sit down. Go get you a friend to come out and play against because it's over for you. So anyway.
So, the premise of this podcast is that the statistics stand out there, that those who have participated in sports, those who lead today, many of the great companies that are being led throughout the world today are led by people who had a great history or had a history of competitiveness associated by their time on fields or courts. Do you agree with that premise? You've interviewed probably more leaders or spent more time than just about anyone that I've ever met in history. Agree with the premise?
I agree with the premise. I think there are two things that make great leaders. One is sports or getting into competitive games at an early age. There's so much lessons you learn out of. And I think the other one that I've watched is I've watched great leaders be formed out of major adverse situations. They were either playing some kind of a competitive sport or they came through the fires and refined themselves through the fire to come out on the other side. And I find those two common lanes I would almost tell you the vast, vast majority of people have done one or the other, and many of them have done both.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah. We're going to pivot here and we're going to go to the second half of our podcast real quick. And that is where we ask you about, through story, if you would, lessons you learned on courts that you applied into your leadership roles early. Obviously, in your career, you were a pastor. You led, churches, in several places. Was there a moment you learned in basketball and sports that ultimately played a role in the way you would lead or manage yourself, even in the ministry?
Yeah, there are several illustrations. I think if I played ball, could pull out a dozen illustrations that they'd look back and say, that was a real important time in my life. When I was in my sophomore year, we were in first place and we were playing Miami Trace over by Washington Courthouse, Ohio. In fact, they were in second place. We were in first place. And I think there were only 2 games left. I think, had a 1-game lead. And I was fouled with 7 seconds left to go. We were behind 1 point. I had a 1-and-1 shot. And I remember, so the coach called timeout and we came over. And of course, he set up, what if you miss here, we got to go Christ the boards. He was giving us some time. And I remember sitting beside Ron Seward, one of the other guards. And I remember looking at him and I said to him, I'm so glad that I'm shooting these shots. He said, what do you mean? I said, I'm glad I'm shooting the shots because I'll make them. Well, he said, how do you know you'll make them? I said, because I have to make them. If I don't make them, we don't win. I'll never forget the look he gave me. He said, you're kidding me. I said, no. And I remember walking out to the foul line, just feeling not cocky, but just, I'm glad I have the ball in my hands. And that was the first realization as a young person that I really wanted the ball. Coach Wooden used to say, in pressure times, there are the guys who want the ball and there are guys who hide for the ball.
Right.
There's the guy who says, let me pass it into you. You know what I mean?
I'll be right. Exactly.
I made both of those shots. We won our league championship, but I've never forgotten that. And I can just say that I want the ball. I want the ball, not because I'm trying to be selfish. I want the ball because I think that I bet on myself. And one of the great leadership principles I teach all the time is if you won't bet on you, why should someone else bet on you? Mm. Why should I always look for someone else to believe in me before I believe in me, and so someone else to step up before I step? No. Leaders step up. And now I've often wondered, well, what happened if I'd have missed those 2 shots? And I honestly don't think it would have changed my attitude. I think I would have still the next time. I think I'd have still wanted the ball.
Right.
One of the things I think athletics did for me is it helped me discover myself, because you have to flesh out all the things that you are taught in a real game situation. So very quickly, you're doing something that you learned and you're going to find out if it works. It's kind of like during difficult times, I tell people, this is where you know if the values that you teach are the values that you live. And there's something just very healthy about the fact that I have to now go out and I have to produce. And people are watching. People are watching. But I've often thought, what would happen if I'd have missed those shots? Would that have made me a different person? Would that have backed me away? And I don't know. I don't think it would have. I think I just knew that if somebody said, who should shoot the foul shots? I'd raise my hand. I was only a sophomore, but I raised my hand and said, I should shoot the foul shots. Now, that could be cocky, but I didn't feel cocky. I just felt that I thought my odds were better than someone else's.
You were ready for the moment.
I was ready for the moment. Yeah.
Speaking of betting on yourself, one of my favorite lessons from you was how early in your professional career, you identified others out there who did what you were doing very well. You wrote them letters and you asked to come learn from them, offered to pay them for their time, right?
Yeah.
Because you were betting on yourself. And then you made the rounds and you ended up in some enormously powerful conversations that shaped you.
Life-changing.
So I'm wondering, that idea of betting on yourself.
Yeah.
Would you tell that story?
Yeah, I'll be glad to, because you have to understand where I was. I was in southern Indiana in a little place called Hillham. Now, all of your sports people are going to understand. They don't know where Hillham is, but Hillham's 5 miles from French Lick.
Yeah.
Larry Bird.
The hick from French Lick.
Yeah, the hick from French Lick. In fact, while I was pastoring there in Hillham, Larry Bird was a junior high and maybe 1 or 2 years of his high school year. He wasn't still a great player yet. He was a good player, but not a great player at that time. But I'm in French Lick in this country church of 100 people. And I read a book on the largest churches in America, and there were 10 of them. I got the information on each one of them, and I either called them or wrote them letters and said, I would like to have 30 minutes of your time. You don't know who I am, but you have so much to teach me, and I'll give you $100 if you'll give me 30 minutes of your time. Now, $100, I made that year $4,800. That was my year salary, $4,800. And so $100 was a lot of money to me. And here's what's beautiful. Of the 10 that I wrote or called, 2 said yes and 8 said no or didn't reply. So I went to those 2. And I mean, when I went to see them, I had 5 pages of legal pages full of questions to ask. Now, I'm doing a 30-minute interview. So, I mean, get the picture. I mean, maybe 3 questions. I've got 50, 60, 70 questions. And I sit down, turn on my tape recorder, and I ask the questions. 30 minutes later, I shut everything off, reached over, gave them a $100 check, and thanked them for their time. And both of those people, they didn't even know each other, but both of those pastors said, I don't want your money. Your money maybe got you in the door because of your passion, but now that I know you, let's go to lunch. We went to lunch. I spent some more time asking questions with them. We went back, and of course, because we're faith, they prayed over me. And I went out in the parking lot, and I would sit in the car, all alone in that car in the parking lot, and I'd put my head against the steering wheel, and I'd bawl like a baby. And I'd just say, I want that. I want that. Give me a little bit of that, God. Give me a little bit of that. What was powerful is 8 said no. Only 2 said yes. Those 2 talked to the other 8. Said, we met this kid. He's from a little country church, but this boy, you got to meet him. Literally in 3 years, those 2 got me into the other 8. It's a huge principle to me, and the fact that so many people, they say, well, I didn't get what I wanted, so I just didn't do it. And I said, I don't know when I've ever gotten what I wanted in the beginning. I never get what I want. I just get what I'm going to get. You got to take what you're going to get. You got to do something with what you're going to get. It's like the kid one time I was speaking to 2,000 people at a leadership conference and signing books, long line, and the kid comes up to me and says, man, he said, this is great. He said, I've decided I want to do what you do. I said, well, that's good. I said, let me ask you a question. I said, do you want to do what I did so you can do what I do? Hey, of course you want to do what I want to do. We all want to do what somebody that's a star is doing. The question is not, what do you want to do that? Do you want to did? Hey, forget the do, go back to the did, and if you don't do the did, you don't get to do the do. So just go back to the did as quickly. And it was just a beautiful lesson.
Transcribing that's going to be something else. I can't wait to try to come up with that.
Well, when you get done transcribing, it's just going to be a bunch of doo-doos, what's going to be. Okay. But the point being, walk through the door you got open.
Right.
So much of life happens after you move. My father used to, give me the little story. You've probably heard it. 5 frogs on a log.
Right.
4 decide to jump off. How many frogs are left? And first I said, well, 1. Dad said, no, 5. Dad, you said 4 frogs decided to jump off. How many are left? There's 1. He said, no. Just because you decide to do something doesn't mean you did it.
Yeah.
So often I'd look at people and they said, well, I didn't do that. I was hoping for a better opportunity, and I look at them and say, if the door is just cracked open, go through that door. Action attracts what you're going to need. You don't attract it by sitting. We're supposed to leave our footprints in the sand as a time, not our butt prints in the sand. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
There's no butt print lesson here. You gotta start moving.
One last question. As leaders, often one of the challenges is that everyone comes to you, right? They come asking for guidance. They come asking for wisdom. But there's got to be windows of time when you even feel as if your tank is running low, right?
Oh, totally.
Nearing dry. Where do you go as a leader to refill your tank? And how might your lessons that you've learned instruct where you go to kind of build yourself back up so you can continue to give to others?
Well, you cannot give what you do not have. So when you're on empty, you're on empty. The quickest way to get back to where you want to be with a full tank is to quickly go fill up. And I have 3 sources. First of all, I'm a person of faith. So I would have to tell you right up front, time with God, prayer, meditation, worship, stuff like that. I mean, that's who I am. And the interview happened to be mine. So it's where I go.
Right.
In fact, that's my first source of strength. And when I have people that are running on empty, many times I just tell them, I say, well, I wish you had my faith, because honest to God, it's huge what I received there. But the second place that I do is I pull away. I get away from everybody. Totally opposite of what you think. I find great refueling in spending time by myself, thinking, again, praying, listening to, I take walks about every day, and I listen to podcasts. I'm a podcast junkie. I have a 5-minute rule on a podcast. Either hit it in 5 minutes or I'm gone. I can tell you the good ones. I can tell you the bad ones. But on an average walk, I'll get 3 to 5 ideas off of an average walk. And I stop walking. If I get an idea, I say, oh, I got to get that. I got to get that now. Because I learned a long time ago that the moment you receive something, you have to have a place to put it. Because the number one time waster is looking for things that are lost. And the reason they're lost is you didn't have a place to put it. So I'm very organized and I have places to put. So when I watch and listen to your podcast, I'll be stopping and taking notes. And then I go back on, because how many times we read a book and a month later we're going through that book saying, I know I read that in there and it was so good. And we waste 20 minutes looking for something that if we filed it the first time, we never had to look for it again. So I refuel myself by pulling away and then being very intentional in refueling myself. There are some people that just fill me up, and there's some people that drain me. Hey, there's some people I hang around with them, didn't do anything. Hey, my tank is empty. I just filled it up and oops, what happened? I must have a leak in my tank somewhere in that whole process. The third thing I do a lot of that just has been very helpful, I call them the bookends of success. And it's the front end is preparation and the back end is reflection. And I think all is well that begins well, and I think all is well that ends well. Every time I need to refuel myself, I say, okay, what do I need on the front end to get the tank started? And then on the back end, okay, what am I learning from this? And what am I receiving from this? I'm a pretty big reflector. Reflection turns experience into insight. So when people say experience is the best teacher, it's not true at all. I know people that are getting a lot of experience. They're getting older, but they're not getting any better.
Uh-huh.
It's only if I can evaluate that experience and pull out of it that I really refuel myself and grow myself. And so those are some things I do.
John, you've given me so much over the years, so much more even today. So grateful. I hope that when you listen to this podcast, you'll agree the first 5 minutes were strong, and you'll be able to. I'll be able to keep you for minute 6.
No, let me tell you how this is going to work. When you have other people on your podcast, I'm going to listen. I don't listen to myself at all. I say once is enough for me. Early years, I would listen to myself after it was taped or something. I did it about 3 times, and I was so disappointed that I just quit. So when I'm on your podcast, I won't even turn that down. But when you have all the other great sports leaders, I'm going to be a subscriber, my friend. I'm going to, because I know you. You're one of the greatest teachers, one of the best storytellers I ever have met. And I know that you're going to maximize the people you have on your program. And I'm very excited for your podcast. And I'm telling everybody about it. I'm just saying, hey, that's someone you want to listen to. Because trust me, I've listened to plenty bad ones. Trust me. When you find some gold, you just point to everybody and say, there's some gold over there. Go get it.
John Maxwell, I love you. I appreciate you, brother. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Love you too. Very much. Thanks for having me.
I am so thankful for John's incredible insight. Remember when he told the story about his very first basketball hoop that had no rim? He said, when I shot the basketball and it bounced off the backboard, I realized it was not fun shooting a ball unless you have a target. That was the first leadership lesson John learned from hoops. If you don't have a goal, you lose all your incentives. If your team does not have a goal that they helped create, they will lose all of their incentive. I want this conversation to have lasting impact. So for a free outline of all the best advice from this conversation, visit episode 8 on corporatecompetitorpodcast.com. Thanks for listening to the show. Did you like what you heard? If so, subscribe to the podcast. We will be rolling out a new episode every Wednesday, and you can be the first to listen. Subscribe on our website, corporatecompetitorpodcast.com, or by texting subscribe to 58885, and you will receive a free chapter of one of my best-selling books. While you're there, remember to join the Greatness Community. For a free weekly leadership lesson, I write for Forbes.com and information on my live and virtual keynote speeches. Stay in touch by connecting with me on social media at Don Yeager on Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, LinkedIn. Finally, are you a corporate competitor? If so, tell me the story about a time when your athletic experience taught you a leadership lesson you still use today. Until next week, I appreciate you.